beautiful aquariums, and the particular style that we're going for today is called the Nature Aquarium style. Now, it was a style invented by Takashi Amano, a Japanese aquascaper, sadly passed away in 2015, but his legend lives on through this style of aquascaping. And the main concept is using natural elements from outside and putting them into the aquarium space. So we use wood, we use rocks. We can use just rocks only or wood only. When we use rocks only, it's called iwagumi. And when I just pretend nothing happened there, it's no problem. When we use wood-based layouts, we call it roiboku. So today we're going to use wood and rocks, and we call that the Nature Aquarium style. It's going to be a classic style. Classic foreground, midground, background plants, classic epiphyte plants. They're plants that attach to your wood and rocks. And it's a style it's kind of synonymous with my style because it's very easy to achieve. Beginners can replicate it. You don't necessarily need CO2 injection. You don't necessarily need a lot of light. So for me, it's one of the most accessible aquascape styles you can create, and almost 100% almost guarantee success if you follow the guidelines that we're going to go through today. Okay, so the aquarium itself is a Ciano something or other. It holds about 80 litres, I think, or so, 100 litres. 105 litres. Okay, that Evo 60. Quite a tall aspect ratio, so that means it's quite a tall tank compared to its length. So we need to bear that in mind when we're planning the aquascape. So I've already pre-chosen some beautiful pieces of wood, and I haven't got the rocks yet. We're going to do that live because that's really exciting. But I've got some beautiful wood here. I forget the name of the wood.
Co2 catfish wood.
Yeah, it is very, very floaty. So whoever wins, you will need to be really, really careful when you fill up with water. What I recommend you do is actually place. And there is some places here where you can place a couple of rocks on there to stop it from floating up, because it will look beautiful, but when you fill up with water and it all floats, not so beautiful. Okay, so I normally go for substrate first, but because this is such a giant piece, I'm going to put this in first and then put the substrate around it, and that's also going to help secure it hopefully and stop it from floating. So you can see it's got a lot of height there already, and we've kind of positioned the wood to how we think it looks most natural. So you can look at the aquarium, look at the wood, rotate it around an all axis. You know, for instance, that looks a bit weird. That looks okay, but it's not going to fit because that filter box is in the way there. That could kind of work like that. You could have like rocks underneath and that kind of creeping over the rocks. But I'm going to go for this angle here. I'm just going to remove those staples. I would do, but I'm probably going to injure myself, so whoever wins has free iron supplements in the staples for the plants. There you go. Oh, sorry. Wood and glass, it's okay. It's rocks and glass, that's when it starts to become a bit more of an issue. Okay, that's not looking quite so natural. You can see the wood's kind of flowing away from you. We kind of want to flow it towards us, I think. So ideally, we should be able to rotate that around. And then we have quite a nice composition there. So just mindful that the wood hopefully shouldn't touch the glass, because that becomes a potential issue for maintenance. When you're wiping your algae, you don't want the wood to be in the way, for instance. Now, I did play around with this earlier and I got it bang on and I can't seem to... Yes, that's it. Okay, so none of the wood is touching the glass, so that's fine. There's a lot of empty space here. So we want to fill up that potentially, otherwise we have too much negative space, we call that. And we call this, the whole kind of thing we're doing now is called the hardscaping process. This is called the hardscape. And the plants are like the softscape, if you like. And I use an analogy, many of you may have heard of this, but the hardscape is like the skeleton, like the human skeleton. And then you have the plants and the water, that's like the flesh, the muscles and the blood of the human. So you start off with a very strong skeleton structure, and then you can build upon it and create a really strong aquascape, a really strong kind of human, if you like. So that's in there now. We've got some smaller pieces of wood, some complements. So this is actually bogwood, so it's a different type of wood to the Corvo catfish, but it does look quite similar, and after time, once the wood's saturated with water, it's all going to look really dark brown and look the same anyway. But you can see the textures are very similar, and it looks quite natural, I think, together. So we fill up that space there, and you can see it's looking like one nice coherent piece there now. And then let's fill up this space here a little bit here. And that fills up that space really nicely there. And then what you can do, depending on your kind of planting plan, you can actually use this, if you come over the top and then see down, you can look from, yeah, that's it. So you can see we've actually got segregated natural areas now where we could plant into, and we could create quite a formal style of planting. So that's just one idea that we might use later. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that wood now. What I'd encourage you to do at home when you've got your hardscape, you know, there's loads of great hardscape here. Please do buy as much as you can afford today. Hoard it at home, and then when you get to create your next aquascape, you've always got loads of materials to choose from. It's always better to have too many hardscaping products than not enough. Always better to have options. And I think a couple of lessons here with this one in particular is that we've really accentuated the height of the aquarium. So we've deliberately used a really tall piece of hardscape here, and it's got some really beautiful kind of textures, nooks and crannies in there, and these are going to be perfect for attaching our plants later on. So really beautiful hardscape layout, very happy with that. Okay, next we're going to put some of our substrate in. Now, I would ideally use, if I was going to full planted aquarium, I do use an aquarium soil. We're not going to do that today. It is a low energy setup, so we don't necessarily need to use a really full-on expensive substrate system. So I've got some beautiful inert gravels and sands here, and then what I'm going to do is target feed the plants with these nutrient balls here. We'll talk about those later. So we have some beautiful kind of cosmetic sands here, which are still okay to grow plants. They're just not like a plant specialist substrate. Absolutely fine. They're just not going to feed the roots so well as say an aquarium soil would do. So we just open this up. Hopefully it's not going to cloud up too much. We're not actually going to fill the aquarium with water today. That's going to be the lucky winner. So we just pour this in. Now if you had time at home, you could pre-rinse this. Whoever does win this aquascape, I would recommend you fill up really, really slowly with water for the first time. Use a colander potentially, and just like I said, put maybe some choice stones on top of the wood to stop it from floating. If I had the time, I would consider using maybe some super glue, some cigarette filters. What you can do for those that roll their own cigarettes, you can buy the cigarette filter tips. It's like basically like a fiberglass. And what you can do using a cyanacrylate based super glue, you can actually wedge those cigarette tips or cotton wool buds or whatever into the gaps in between where you want to glue. Apply the super glue to the cigarette tip or the cotton wool, and it will actually make a solid kind of adhesive, like a cement. So we could actually do that technique today if you had time. There is video tips on that on the internet. I'll put there we are. But yeah, it's a kind of advanced technique for building complex hardscape layouts where you'll get kind of professional high-end aquascapers. They'll spend literally weeks and months constructing these super elaborate kind of structures. They're absolutely out of this world. one of the reasons I love aquascaping so much is just the, when I'm actually aquascaping on my own, it's a bit more stressful doing it in front of loads of people. But when I'm doing it on my own, I kind of, I go into like a flow state and I get into this kind of creative zone where it just feels like I'm really kind of connected to what I'm doing. And I feel like, I think it's like a very mindful process where you kind of just you and that thing that you're working on, kind of all your stresses and strains are kind of disappear. And it's just such a lovely thing. So if you're not into aquascaping already, you know, it's something that you can really have fun with. You know, you can have an empty tank, a dry tank. You know, it's just a really good thing to have fun with. You know, while it's dry, just have fun. Play around with your substrates, play around with your gravel, your sand, and just, you know, maybe make it look as good as you can. Maybe take a photo, have a little play, take another photo, and then you've got this library of photos, and you can swipe around and, you know, see which one looks the best. Send it to your mates. You know, have a little, you know, collaboration, and, you know, just try to create the best on a hardscape layout you can. And I would do, but I need some more sand. Excuse me. So this is JBL Zanzibar. It's a very natural sand. A lot of sands are just kind of monotone. They just have one solid colour, one solid texture, one solid grain size. Whereas this is quite varied and looks more natural. So I really like this actually. It doesn't contain any nutrients, so it's not going to feed the plant roots. So we will need to add some of those later. Stephen?
Yeah?
Do you have a paintbrush?
Yes.
Being a professional aquascaper, I should have a paintbrush, really, but no excuse, just didn't bring one. You can see it's kind of dusty a bit, so if you did buy this product yourself, you might want to pre-rinse it, like I said. Looks a bit like snow's falling on a tree. Quite nice. So this light is only a 12.5 watt light, so we are going to have to, thank you very much. We are going to have to stick to easier plants. It isn't a very particularly strong light, but the great thing about having a white substrate, it actually reflects the light upwards, so the plants are actually going to get a little bit more light kind of naturally just from that reflection. So that's something to bear in mind. It will kind of, white sand tends to encourage a little bit of algae growth though, because of that reflective nature. But hopefully if we plant enough plants, give those plants what they need. The great thing about plants is they help prevent algae. You know, the more plants we have, the faster those plants are growing, the more healthy those plants are, the less chance of algae we get. Okay, so that's the wood in. It's quite nice. Now it's time maybe to put, I think I quite fancy, it's very kind of leaning over to the right, so maybe we need to kind of have a little bit of tension here, a little bit of an offset there, coming over to the left, so maybe a small piece of wood. So what I'm trying to do here, you see these natural lines in the wood. You can line them up with the natural lines that are already there, and then you create this cohesive kind of flowing pattern, and it looks really natural. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make it look as natural as possible. If you're just throwing those pieces of wood in there randomly, it's not going to look, well, I would challenge you to say it would look as good, hopefully. Right, that way. No, not feeling it's too big, that piece. Yeah, perfect. Okay, now let's think about some smaller kind of rocks to complement the stone. So to go with whitish sand, let's go for like a grey, thank you so much, stone. So get some smaller pieces here, make sure they fit. So we're looking at the textures here. I mean this is beautiful. I mean, look at this here. Can you see that? That's really beautiful. When you're choosing your rocks, have a look at the textures. Have a look at how interesting does it look. If you look at that, yeah, it's relatively boring, isn't it? It's quite flat, quite rounded. You look at something like that. I mean, that is pretty boring, pretty rounded. But you turn it around and you have that bit on display. That is much, much nicer. So have a really good look at your stone in all three axes and have a think, how's that best placed? So I'm looking at you, that's a bit weird, isn't it? Sorry, mate. So can you see these lines here? This is called the strata. What we can do, we can actually have the strata lining up with those natural grains in the wood, and that would create a sense of harmony and flow. Or we can directly have the strata opposed to those lines in the wood, and that deliberately creates tension. And where the magic happens is balancing between the flow and the tension. I'm getting a bit deep there, but hopefully some of you get that. So I'm going to use some tension and smash the tank. I'm going to put that there. I think it's a bit big. Yeah, it's been a bit too optimistic there, wasn't I? See, this is a beautiful piece. Look at that. Look at that. So we've got the natural grains here of the wood, and then you've got the strata here. They are perpendicular to each other. That means 90 degrees to each other. And I think that looks really great. That creates deliberate tension there. So now to balance this stone, we could do with a smaller one kind of here. This is another beautiful piece here. Who knew rocks could be so exciting? So that would slot in beautifully down here, like so. And then top tip, if you just sort of gently lift your sand up to the stone, it looks like the stone is naturally kind of protruding from the earth. That's the kind of, this whole kind of naturalistic sense we're going for. So I think that's okay. The rules say you shouldn't use two stones. You shouldn't go for this kind of symmetry. But I think there's enough interest in the wood, enough interest around here. It doesn't look too symmetrical. I'm happy with that. You know, rules are meant to be broken sometimes, aren't they? Okay, I'm quite pleased with that now. I think this would come up a bit. So we can soften, this doesn't look natural now because we've got these gaps here. What we can do, we can soften, sorry, you can't see, can you? We can soften these unnatural gaps here with planting, you see. We can use the epiphyte plants. These are plants that naturally attach to the decor to soften these areas. Okay. That's a great question. Sirius Stone, Sirius rock. Very popular. Very interesting to note. You've got, what's the colour of the stone? Well, it normally changes a lot. There you go. It looks actually a lot, the contrast is a lot more there. The grey and the whites are a lot more contrasting when you wet it, so it does look good. Okay, now what we could do, if we didn't want to plant into the foreground at all, we could go for some really kind of sexy graded gravels. I'll show you that now. So what we can do, we call this gravel grading. So we're basically using the same kind of hue of colour and texture, but just different sizes, different grain sizes. So we started off with the finest grain there, and the next, we go for the next finest grain, and then we go for the most coarse. And you just want to just sprinkle it around the rocks, and you just create this like really natural kind of transition from that right smooth, bright white sand up to the rock. At the moment, the contrast is quite harsh, isn't it? You see this sort of kind of monotone white colour, and it goes straight into that dark grey rock. It's quite a harsh contrast, so we can soften that using the graded gravel. So I'll do that now quickly, and then we can start planting. We're doing for time, 6:23. David, are you good at plant prep?
Alright. I've done it a few times before.
Good. Everything in that green bucket. Just put it all out here then. So what we can do, just get little kind of fingertip handfuls and just sprinkle it around the base of this stone.
Stones first.
Yeah. You get the idea. If you start off, I've done it the wrong way round, you start off with the biggest ones. What's your beaver? Bucket of water. So start off with the biggest grains. Good. And you can see it's starting to look a bit more natural already, hopefully. What you can do, what the advanced people kind of do, the more experienced folk, they'll get a piece of rock, hammer and chisel, safety glasses of course, and then smash the living out of it, and then you'll get loads of little chips. And then what you can do is add more details with that around the rocks as well, which creates really beautiful, naturalistic kind of texture. Okay, this is like super empty, but we are going to plant around there, but it does need something there, doesn't it? It needs a little rock there, I think.
Cheers, mate.
It's too big. I think we're going to have to do this one here. This is the nice, so you're looking at it all angles, remember. What's the most kind of interesting side? Probably this one here. Now how can we make that match potentially the strata and the grains of the wood and the rocks? So now the tempting thing is to pop it straight in the middle there, but then that is really going to make it look symmetrical, because you've got the rock on the left, the rock on the right, and then a rock slap bang in the middle. It's not going to look right, so we just need to offset that just to make it more aesthetically balanced. So I don't think it looks good. I don't think it works. What do you think? Can you see it's a slightly different one? I did wet that, didn't I? That'd be why. Yeah, okay. So can you see there's a natural kind of strata there and a natural strata there. If I just make that a bit more perpendicular there, pop a few of these bad boys in front. TV chefs do, is it like the... You get the idea, and you can carry on doing that until your heart's content, so you make it look as natural and as graded as you like. So, my friend David Shanahan, Aquatic Wilderness on Instagram, give him a follow. Thank you, David. Round of applause for David, everyone. Kindly preparing some plants. We've got some beautiful stem plants here in the background. These are all easy plants, by the way, all plants that don't necessarily need CO2 injection, but will absolutely benefit from CO2 injection. But what we can do, most of you probably know how to prepare a pot, but I will show you very quickly. The same principle applies to all of the pots. Take away your label. Your label contains a lot of useful information about that plant species, how fast it grows, how demanding it is, whereabouts in the aquarium it should go, etc. Whereabouts in the world it comes from naturally. And then you have your plant here. So grab the main roots, grab the main plant biomass there, hold it gently, give it a tug away from the pot there, and then you have your fiberglass, they call this a mineral wool or root, rock wool, that's the one, thank you. Normally comes apart in two simple to remove halves, usually, or 4/4, there we go. And then what you can do, normally what I like to do, is you see the roots are quite long and straggly, simply tear them, so you've got about an inch, about 2 centimetres of root left. That's going to stimulate new root growth and just make it easier to plant. Now what we can do is plant that straight away, like so, with our tweezers or our fingers. But to get more economical coverage, what we can do is actually split apart the plant into several portions. And then if we plant those kind of separately, we get a lot more coverage, a lot more economical growth. So you don't have to plant that whole plant pot in one go, we can separate it out. Okay, so this is Kryptokirani Wenditii green, one of my favourite crypts. Crypts are a family of plants, very easy, don't need a lot of light, will grow really well in the shade, don't need CO2 injection, but will definitely benefit from a nutrient-rich substrate. So what we'll do later, we'll pop in some of these nutrient-rich balls here. They're going to help feed those plant roots. So you might be noticing I'm planting into the Aquascape dry. This just makes it a lot less messy, a lot easier. But what we do need to do is spray the plants fairly regularly to stop them from drying out. So for those that don't know, plants in the greenhouses are grown out of water. We call this hydroponics. Some of you may know about those from growing another type of crop. So basically the plants grow out of water. They have unlimited access to CO2 in the air. So for those that don't know, plants use CO2 to grow. They use it to photosynthesize. That means they use light and CO2. They use the carbon in the CO2 to grow. They're a carbon-based life form, just like us. They're actually made, almost half of the plant is made from carbon, about 40%. And the best way for the plant to grow is to add more carbon, and the best way to get more carbon is from carbon dioxide. Now there is a base level of carbon dioxide in the aquarium water that's very low, typically about 3 to 4 parts per million. So for the plant to grow really well underwater, we ideally need to add CO2 injection. We're not doing that today. There is lots of videos on YouTube. I've created quite a few about CO2 injection. Please do look into CO2 injection if you want to become a bit more serious about growing your aquarium plants. So we were talking about hydroponics just a minute ago, and the reason that hydroponics is so successful is that the plants grow out of water and they have this access to CO2, and now we know why CO2 is important. So because the plant's growing out of the water, it's actually very robust as well, because it has to support its own body weight. So the plant actually is very hardy, easy to handle, transports well, and actually very adaptable. So these aquatic plants that actually grow out of water are actually better off, believe it or not, growing out of water than they are underwater. So when we put them underwater, they actually really struggle. They're actually kind of like, where's my CO2, where's my light? You know, they really struggle. And there's only a few species that will fully adapt, to underwater growth. In fact, all of the plants here that we're using today in nature will prefer to grow out of water. So it's important to note, when we're struggling with aquarium plants, just remember that plant wants to actually grow out of water. So just bear that in mind. There's a few plants that will only grow underwater, and that's Vallisneria and Ageria. So your Vallis, most people have heard of Vallis, and your kind of Ageria densa, what's the common name? The classic kind of goldfish weed, you know the one. Ageria densa, yeah. It's a weed basically, pond weed. This is a beautiful plant, Sterigine. Again, will benefit from a nutrient-rich substrate, but doesn't necessarily need high light or CO2 injection. But we've already agreed that they would definitely benefit from CO2. So it's important when you're preparing your plants or planning your plant layout to ensure you think about the kind of the end result. What's your end goal? What's the thing that you want to aim for? Have you got a visualization? Have you got a photo, a picture, an Instagram post, whatever? Have you got this end vision in mind? And then plan accordingly. I mean, you don't have to have an end vision. You could just have fun, and sort of experiment, make mistakes, and go along that way. But if you want to kind of really succeed as an aquascaper, it's a good idea to have a bit of a plan. Have a little think about what you want to achieve. There's nothing wrong with copying someone else's aquascape that you've seen on the internet or in a book. I encourage it. It means that you're going to automatically kind of choose the things that you like. If you follow their kind of the person that you're copying, if you're following their methodology, verbatim, step by step, then this is brilliant. You're pretty much guaranteed to have success. And that's one of the reasons I love, doing what I do, these workshops, so people can hopefully not necessarily copy directly, although that isn't a problem if they want to, but at least use some of the elements of what I'm doing and some of the knowledge, hopefully, that I'm imparting to improve your own hobby. So this is Kryptokirani Nebelia. This will stay relatively short as well. Foreground plants, of course, normally we keep them in the front, and they're going to be the shortest, so we can see to the back. Midground plants in the midground, of course, and then finally our background plants. And then, finally, we have our epiphyte plants, which we'll do right at the end. So where are we? We're those are the foreground plants here. This is a carpeting plant, Lilyopsis. Again, it's a relatively easy plant. It could potentially carpet in here with no CO2, so we will give it a try. And I'm just going to pop that around the front. We could actually separate that into many, many more portions if we wanted to. Can you see each one of those, basically one of those leaves is a separate plant almost. So we could spend literally hours if we wanted to separating them up, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to sort of tear them apart into about centimetre portions and then just pop them in our sand. Eventually these are going to send out runners and then new leaves will pop up. And eventually, long term, you could end up with a full carpet. I'm quite happy to leave this area kind of open here. That's a bit of kind of je ne sais quoi to the layout, I would say. Don't even know what that means, but it sounds good. Okay, some more crypts. This is really cool, this process. I find this really relaxing, planting. You're just getting your little plants in your tweezers. Yeah, again, it's mindfulness. There's nothing else existing now apart from this tweezers and this plant, and about 50 people watching. But yeah, it's just a really cool thing. Sometimes I'll have music on when I'm doing it. Sometimes I won't have anything on. Usually, at the moment, my little puppy is just like trying to bite my ankles the whole time when I'm trying to do anything. But I love her to pieces, so that's all good. Anyone else got any dogs here? Dog lovers? Yes. Yeah, there would be no work being done.
No, I mind stuff.
Oh, you had yours? You brought yours?
And
Oh, please, bring your puppy next time. Yeah, I've got a little Betty. She's 4 months or so now, and she's just absolutely adorable, but really hard work. But we wouldn't have it any other way, would we? Okay, we're really getting through this planting now. How are we doing the time? 6:37, good. Any questions? No, I'm either really good at explaining stuff, or you're really shy. Or maybe a bit.
Yep.
Yes.
I have a plastic tank. I've already cycled the water.
Okay.
Is there any merit in doing that?
Yes, because ammonia can actually trigger algae. So if you have a pre-cycled aquarium, that's good. You won't need to do as many water changes as you normally would with a new tank.
Yeah, just with crypts, obviously, I know you've spoken about crypt melt on a lot of
Yes.
your videos.
Yeah.
I noticed you tend to just plant them in
Yeah.
and deal with the melt as it happens, but I've seen some aquascapers like to cut all the leaves off actually as basically before they plant them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, what's your name again? Sorry, Stu. Stu, what Stu's saying is the crypt plants, which I'll show you in a minute, for those that don't know. So these plants here and here, and these small ones here, these crypts are very prone to disintegrating, melting, after you've just planted them and your aquarium set up. All that plant is doing is adapting to its new home underwater. So we talked about growing hydroponically, didn't we? The plant's growing out of water. Those leaves are adapted to their out of water growth. Okay, so they're robust, they're quite strong, and when they adapt to underwater, they become a lot more fragile, a lot weaker. But during this process, they use a lot of energy, and they can actually kind of deliberately almost not kill themselves, but disintegrate. And then, if they've got a healthy rootstock, you'll get a load of new leaves come through. So to bypass this process, what a lot of professional aquascapers do, or more experienced scapers, they'll get their crypts, they'll get their pots, and they'll literally just cut all the leaves right off. So you just literally have this rootstock, and then they just plug that rootstock into the gravel or the soil, and then the new leaves will be readily adapted and they'll grow. But you just don't see anything. You just have this rootstock in the sand, and it'd be really boring for you guys to see just me putting rootstocks in. So I actually like to plant the whole plant, and if you have if your water's okay and you've got CO2 especially, that plant normally will adapt a lot easier anyway. So I personally don't cut the leaves off, I just like to see them. And I like to see them adapt as well. A lot of the time they'll adapt without melting, and that's cool. Cool, we're nearly onto the background plants now. Got loads more carpenting plants. I don't think we're going to need all those, mate. But we'll see what we get at the end. Okay, red stem plant. This is called Lobrigia palustris super red. It's one of the easier red stem plants. Very, very fast grower. Branches readily, so it will just send out new side shoots, and it will go quite chaotically unless you control it. Okay, so it does need frequent trimming. Great plant for beginners. Doesn't necessarily need CO2 injection. As we know, it will definitely benefit. So, red is a high impact colour, so it should be positioned accordingly, like it's a focal point. And we don't necessarily kind of want focal points all the way to the left or to the right. We normally want them around the centre. So we'll pop that in around here. What I've done is I've just gathered together sort of 5 to 10 stems at a time there. You can grab those all in one go and then pop them in one go, or if you were a bit more budget conscious, you could actually separate those stems individually, plant them along, and then what would happen is once they've grown to a certain level, you can trim them, you can replant those trimmings, and then where you've trimmed from, you're going to get 2 new side shoots. So this is how you can propagate most stem plants. If you are interested in aquarium plants a little bit more, you want to know a little bit more kind of detail about them, then I do recommend the Tropical Aquarium Plants YouTube channel. I'm doing some content on there lately. We do plant profiles. There is a playlist dedicated, like a 2-3 minute video on a lot of the different plants that we grow at Tropica. Okay, this is an absolute brute. This is called Heterostatolia. It's a really, really fast growing weed. Doesn't need CO2 injection, and it's a great plant for a new tank because the faster, like we said earlier, I don't know if you remember, but the faster growing the plants are, the healthier those plants are, the less chance of algae we get. So if we plant with a fairly large proportion of fast growing plants, like we've got here, then the chances of algae are going to be a lot less. Another really fast growing, beautiful beginner plant Anyone know? No? Nebelia sassiflora. Absolute classic beginner plant, very, very fast grower. It's another great plant to help get these early algae issues under control. We really want to be planting quite densely, ideally with a fairly big proportion of fast-growing plants as well. This is going to grow to the top of the tank within probably 3 weeks or so. It's a really, really fast grower. And you can trim it, propagate it like I described earlier, just trimming the stems and replanting. If you do trim the plants and you need to actually get rid of the plant, please don't throw it outside in near any waterways. Don't just throw it in your garden. Actually properly get rid of it, because what can happen is, especially with some of the more invasive species, they can get released into the natural waterways and actually cause devastation. So, please be mindful of how if you get rid of your plant cuttings. Well done, thank you so much, David. Round of applause for David. Missed a bit. Okay, we've got a few more Lilyopsis carpeting plants to pop around the front. Has anyone actually got this aquarium already, model, at home? I'm curious to know. Is it any good? No? Okay. So it's a 12.5 watt light. I'm curious to, this is quite a tall tank. I'm curious to see if it has the power to grow these plants, but it'll look good for at least a few days, whoever I think. If whoever wins it, I'll give you my contact details, and if you have major issues with it, I can help you out, okay? Part of the service. It reminds me of a layout I once did with a guy called Peter Cookson. It's a dual Lido 120, so it's quite a similar size aquarium. Similar scape actually, I've just remembered why it's so familiar. So Peter's watching. Hello Peter. Okay, that's about it with the carpets. Okay, next plant. Everyone knows what that is, surely? Yeah, Lubious Nana, classic, one of the original aquarium plants. And Lubious likes to be kind of shaded. It gets algae quite quickly and easily, so it's a really good idea to kind of pop it further down in the aquarium where it's not going to get too much light, and hopefully ideally be a bit shaded. So what I like to do is, in those nooks and crannies, you can literally just poke in your epiphyte plants. And this is why it's a really good idea to, the more complex and textured your hardscaping is, the more opportunity you're going to have to attach your epiphyte plants. So this is one of the other reasons I really like to use this complex kind of hardscape. The thing is with epiphyte plants, so this is a Lubious Nana, which we've said, they just add a real kind of sense of maturity, I think, to the layout straight away. Really slow growing, low maintenance, again, doesn't necessarily need CO2. It's important we don't bury things like Anubias and Java fern, these epiphyte plants. It's important we don't bury them in the substrate. What happens is, you can see there, see where the leaves are growing from, this green fleshy portion here. This is called the rhizome. and that's the portion where the leaves grow from. And that needs to be exposed to circulating water. If that's buried in the substrate, it will go anoxic. That means lack of oxygen, and it will melt. So that's why the epiphyte plants, they need to be attached to our decor in order for that circulating water to keep the plant fresh and healthy.
Sorry.
No one saw anything, you're all right. Okay, that's perfectly positioned just there. Now it's George Farmer's steak. Get the Java fern in there. Right, just a warning, this bit of wood here isn't the most secure, so whoever wins, a bit of super. Do you remember, whoever wins, come and chat to me and I'll give you some tips on how we can arrange this. Okay, give it a final spray. Do we have any other plants that we can pop in there to make it a bit denser? I think we could probably do with some more background plants. Sorry, Steve. Okay, super fast prep, there we go. Yeah, trouble is when you plant really dense, is that the plants kind of like a little bit of circulating water around them and some light as well. So if you just literally rammed it full of plants, there are going to be some plants in there that are going to have limited circulation, limited light. So the answer to your question is yes. Okay. Now I normally fill up with water using my special red colander, but because this is getting raffled off, there's no point because it's going to get emptied straight away anyway. So you'll leave it there. I would love to answer any questions you may have in the audience. Please don't be shy. Okay, I'm really shy, alright? And I can talk in front of all you guys. Come on. No questions. Sorry, I can't hear you, mate.
So the sand's a bit deeper towards the back of the
Yes,
sand.
yeah.
Will that not eventually with the water fill or kind of level out?
It could do. The water comes out from here, so it's not going to directly affect it. It's quite a dense sand, so it's going to hold its shape much better than like a loose soil, for instance. So I think it should be okay. I didn't explain this earlier, but the reason I sloped it to the rear slightly, you get this enhanced sense of depth when you look at the aquarium. It's like an optical illusion. So when you're looking at it like this, because it's deeper at the back, it looks deeper front to back than it really is. Hopefully that makes sense. Do a bit more detail work around here. Any questions on YouTube?
Not really, George. Somebody's just saying put some moss in there. That would look pretty good.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. We've got some moss, haven't we? Yeah, what have we got? Can you name shout the species up?
Taiwan, Spiky, Java, Christmas, Flame, and Barbara.
Let's go Spiky. Thank you very much. So a couple of ways that we can attach our moss. We can tie it on with like cotton thread, which is a pain in the you know what. Or we can use super glue, which Stephen's got some, because I asked him this morning. Can we get some super glue? So the super glue, people are a little bit like, oh, you can use super glue in an aquarium. Yes, it's perfectly safe. As long as it's cyanoacrylate based, it's non-toxic. It's actually used in human surgery, so it's definitely safe for aquariums. Thank you very much. We usually use the gel type, so there's like a really liquidy aqueous solution which is super runny, or we can use a gel type which is a lot more viscous and much better for attaching our plants to kind of vertical surfaces. If you imagine using a liquid, you pop your glue on there, it just runs down, and then what happens is when the super glue kind of dries underwater, it turns a bright white colour and looks really ugly. So it's important we use the smallest amount we can, and ideally the gel type, because it stays more in place.
I think most of them are like water in the tank already. So how do you attack it when?
So what I would do, just do a massive water change, just drain the tank right down, attach your moss, the glue will dry in a few seconds, then refill.
Marine keepers do it with water.
You can glue the water in.
Marine keepers do
Yeah, they
it
do
with
it
corals.
underwater.
That was the first time I saw it used.
Yeah, wow.
For
Yeah,
living coral
it
products.
makes sense actually, because the super glue
It
does actually
sets
need,
faster.
it does need moisture to set. Yeah, that makes sense. So you can actually glue underwater. There you go. I learned something today.
You can in marine tanks if you want to see.
I don't see why we did any difference to the freshwater. Yeah.
I don't use the gel type.
Yeah, don't use the liquid type.
People are asking them.
How would you deal with, how do you get prevent the wood from going moldy when you fill it with water?
Different woods have different levels of mould, but why isn't this working? Number of staff. Thank you. What was the question? Mould.
Mold on the wood?
Yeah, so some types of wood, especially redmore root or spider wood, after a few days you'll start to see this fungal bacteria kind of biofilm growth on the wood. It's normally harmless and you can just brush it off and siphon it away as part of water change.
Is there nozzle?
Okay, so you can tie it on with string, or we can just glue thin layers. It's really important to use a thin layer. If the layer is too thick, what can happen is the layers of the plant that are right at the bottom are going to be starved of circulating water, starved of CO2, and they'll just die off. So it's important that we use a thin layer, and we use a tiny dollop of the glue, like that. Literally just a centimetre by a millimetre, and then just offer that up, and there we are, simple as that. And then what that's going to do, hopefully after a few weeks or so, that's going to start creeping along the wood. We can trim it, that's going to promote compact growth. It will benefit, again, like all plants, from CO2 injection. We get a much kind of more lush, compact growth pattern with CO2 injection and moss. Maybe put some on the stone as well.
Got a question about brown algae.
Yep.
In startup, how to help prevent it?
Just carry on focusing on your water changes and plant growth, and it'll eventually go away on its own. Just be patient. Patience sorts a lot of problems out in
People
aquascaping.
remind me about root taps.
Oh yeah, root tabs. It's because they're not tropical, relaxants are here. Okay, so these are called, it just rolls off the tongue beautifully, 7 + 13 ghoul gown. So really easy to tell people about. So these are basically nutrient balls, and what we do is we pop them in near the crypts, cover them up properly, and they're going to feed the plant roots basically. Super simple. Thank you for the reminder. Stem plants don't need usually so many root feeding nutrients. They get a lot of their nutrients from the water. And that's why it's important to feed a good quality liquid fertiliser. So plants will take in nutrients as their plant food. They take in their plant food through their roots and through their leaves. Now if you've got an epiphyte plant, of course, it can't take its plant through the substrate. It has to take its food through its leaves and through the water. So we definitely need liquid fertiliser for those. Even the plants with the roots in the substrates with access to nutrients from their roots will still benefit from nutrients through their leaves. So the perfect thing is to have a nutrient-rich substrate, nutrient-rich liquid fertiliser, water column with liquid fertiliser, CO2 injection, good lighting, good circulation. There's the key components to achieving successful plant growth.
Somebody's asked about cleaning tips, recommendations.
Yeah, sure. So maintenance, let's talk a bit about maintenance. So I'm a really big fan of preventative maintenance. There's two types of maintenance. There's maintenance that you do to prevent things from happening, and there's maintenance you do when things have gone wrong. We call that corrective maintenance. So always better to do preventative to prevent the issues from occurring. So what I mean by what we'd be doing to preventative maintenance in here would be large frequent water changes for the first month, just to help dilute that water, dilute any nasty stuff that's going to cause algae, help give those plants a boost. Plants love really nice fresh water, they love water changes, and algae hates water changes. So water changes are really important, especially in the early days when algae is very risky. Another top tip that not a lot of people hear about is actually cleaning the aquarium glass really early on in a new aquascape. Even when you don't think it needs it, you can't see anything on there. If you keep it clean, like really from day one, it just never builds up algae on it. And I have, one of my big aquariums, I have algae magnets. I know they're a big no-no for some people because the sand gets caught and they get scratched. But if you're really careful, I use an algae magnet every day on my Highline 400 and 300. And then after that, I use there's a product, Fritz Aquatics glass cleaner, and it actually puts a really thin layer of polish on the glass, and it's non-toxic. And so every time I now clean the inside of the glass with the magnet, and then they wipe the outside, it's just so smooth, and it's a pleasure to do, honestly. Will I sell it to you? So yeah, cleaning the glass frequently is really good. Water changes are really important. You're not going to have to probably trim the plants for a few weeks or so. When you do, the trimming technique depends on the type of plant you have. Stem plants, quite straightforward. You just trim, and then wherever you trim from, you get 2 new shoots usually. You can plant the offcut if you want to propagate, or you can throw it away responsibly. Other trimming that you can do, the crypts, they grow leaves from a rosette, so from a central kind of rose, we call it, they have leaves coming out, and then to trim that, we just literally take away the biggest leaf or the leaf that you want to get rid of. Some crypts will send out runners, so you can just trim them as appropriate. Floating plants, just net away any that you don't want, dispose of very carefully. Please don't get floating plants in nature, they cause absolute devastation. You've seen duckweed. So what other types of plants are there? Epiphyte plants, these are a little bit trickier to maintain. Typically epiphyte plants are really robust by their nature. Their leaves are very securely attached to that rhizome. So what you have to do generally is just work your finger all the way from the leaf to the base of the rhizome there, and just kind of really give it a really good tug, and it will hopefully remove the leaf in one foul movement.
Can you just cut them instead, or is it better
I suppose get hands in there. Yes, you can cut them as well. But you need to do it ideally right. Ideally, you want to be tearing that leaf away from the rhizome that's going to generate a new leaf. If you just trim it, not as likely to generate a new leaf. If you did trim it, try to get it as near to the rhizome as you could. Any other questions? We're talking about maintenance, weren't we? I think I've covered most things. Liquid fertiliser. What fish should we put in here? I think it should be a tall-bodied fish because it's a tall tank. I think it should be something with vertical stripes because we've got this vertical element going on with the wood. So I'm thinking like Pentazona barbs, maybe.
Yeah.
Any other suggestions?
Barbs.
So a barb. It's definitely like an Asian thing to it, I think. Yeah. What was Stephen putting here? Where is he?
I'm down at the front. I'm a South American guy. I'd go with Bentosi tetras, nice and deep bodied. Asian, Any of the chocolate gouramis? Would you go with sparkling, maybe not sparkling, too small. Croaking gouramis perhaps?
Yeah.
Small selection.
Yeah, yeah. Nice. Okay. Any other questions before we call it a close?
One question, what have you not done in the hobby that you really like to do? Philosophical.
You mean in terms of setting up a tank?
Yeah.
He's reached his pinnacle now, he's been at Premier
This is
Aquatics.
it.
Downhill from now, mate. The standard has been set. I'd really like to keep. I've often fantasised about, and it could be a reality at some point. A sort of 8 foot by 3 by 3, for wild outings, and just really. I'm not doing. Yeah. I really want to get into. I'd really like to have the time to get fully into terrariums more. But it's just another hobby, and I haven't got time for that. But yeah, there's a few things. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about the aquarium hobby. There's so much to it, not just aquascaping. I mean, it's like anything in life, isn't it? You can go as deep as you like into something. I'm deep into aquascaping. Steve's deep into his epistogrammas. You guys might be deep into other stuff. But hopefully, this short, hour-long workshop, hopefully you've taken away some key lessons, maybe some advice on hardscaping, plant choice, substrate ideas. But hopefully you've taken something away of value and you can apply to your own aquascapes at home if you have one. I've really enjoyed myself. I'm going to call it a close there, but I am available to have a chat with, sign your books, etc., selfies. So I'll say cheerio to my audience on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching. Thumbs up, subscribe, share. Cheers. Cheerio. Keep on scaping. Cheerio. Bye-bye. Cheers, mate. Thank you. So we're going to do the draw.